Thank you, Secretary Trogdon. Thank you so much for that kind introduction, and thank you all for being here today. Sold out audience. I want to take you into the future of transportation and energy, but before I do that, I want to take you into the past. This is New York City in 1900, Easter Parade. There is one car in this picture in a sea of horses. We used horses as our main means of transportation, all of humanity, for thousands of years. There is one car in this picture there. In 13 years, there was one horse in that picture. Can anyone see it? Essentially, transportation flipped from all horse, -1, to all cars, -1, in just 13 years. 13 years. And this is more than 100 years ago. And as you know, technology is changing even more rapidly now. And this is how quickly disruptions happen. 13 years, that's all it took. If you had invested in a horse barn in 1900, basically you lost all your money. So what is a technology disruption? At the time, the car was the disruptor. A disruption is essentially when there is a convergence of technologies that make something possible, that make a product or service possible, and that product in turn can help create new markets and new jobs and new opportunities, and at the same time, destroy or radically transform existing industries. That's what a disruption is. And it also, we talk about disruption as destruction. It's not necessarily so. Where are the jobs? Well, this is Ford Motor Company in 1913, creating jobs. And the 20th century, America, transportation was the economic engine of the country. So we talk about destruction and creation. Disruptions also change tastes and preferences. Now we think of tastes as something that's constant, but in fact, they're variables. So back then, what happened to all those horses? We ate them. Now, I didn't, right? You didn't. But essentially, they went from being transportation to being food. And even the dean of NYU, New York University, strongly advocated horses. And he called it something like clean meat. And later, after humans, dogs, pets started eating horses. So tastes and preferences do change. And now let me take you to 1985, when the then largest telecom company on earth, AT&T, hired consulting company McKinsey, and they asked them one question, and one question only. By the year 2000, give me a 15-year forecast of this new thing called the cell phone. How many subscribers would we get if we invested in that market? And McKinsey went off and did whatever it is that they do, and they came back with this number, 900,000. By the year 2000, there's going to be 900,000 subscribers. The reality was 109 million. 109 million, right? I mean, that's not a small mistake. That's a factor of 120 times. My little dog could have done better and charged a lot less, right? Not kidding. But really, who knew, right? Who knew that the smartphone and the internet and so on were going to be such a big force? Well, I did, right? And I'm going to tell you how I did know, right? I wish I were an investor, because 15 years ago, I posted this portfolio, educational portfolio, that consisted of little companies like Apple and Google, Netflix, Salesforce, and that portfolio is now worth more than $3 trillion, right? 15 years. So is there any correlation between high-tech disruptions and energy and transportation? It turns out that yes, there is. But here's the question. Why do experts and insiders and mainstream analysts consistently get disruptions wrong every single time? It is the experts who dismiss disruptive opportunities, really smart people. Bill Gates, I mean, he's made a bundle of money, right? How could he be wrong about the internet? How could he be wrong about the smartphone? And so on and so forth. I mean, the cover of Forbes magazine in the year 2007 had Nokia on the cover. Remember Nokia? Yeah. Who can stop Nokia? What else happened in 2007? The iPhone, right? But here's the question that I've asked myself for 15 years. Why do smart people in smart organizations consistently fail to lead or anticipate technology disruptions? Because it's a big deal. Because a lot of money is wasted by not investing in disruption and by investing in the old model, right? So after all that work, I have essentially created a framework for how technology disruptions work. Not in hindsight, that's interesting, but can we anticipate, can we forecast more or less disruptions to come? I'll walk you through some of these elements and then I'll dive into transportation. So one of the things that I look at is technology cost curves. Essentially every single technology improves every year, improves capability and improves cost, both, right? That's what I call the cost curve. So if you look at computing, it's Moore's law, 41% per year on a dollar basis, not just capability. So essentially, every 2 years, we can buy for the same dollar twice the computing capability. Data storage, digital imaging, and so on and so forth. But each one of them is improving at a different rate, which makes it difficult to keep up with all of them. Now, here's another element. I'll come back to technology cost curves. We see a lot of linear projections, right? You take a baseline and then you add a percent over the next 20, 30 years. That's a linear projection. But no technology in history, and I've looked at history, right? 10,000 years. No technology in history has been adopted linearly. They're either a bust or they're adopted as an S-curve. Now, what is an S-curve? They go seemingly slowly. They're not going slowly, but when they're under 1 or 2%, we don't notice them. And then suddenly, boom, they achieve a tipping point, a critical mass, and they explode, and then they slow down again, right, when they get mainstream. So think about the iPhone. Again, smartphones came out in 2007, and they exploded. Apple turned into a $1 trillion company, and now that market is slowing down. Make sense? Now, in the meantime, the cost, not of the phone, but of the technology, is going down exponentially. Now, this is transportation. Transportation is not a smartphone, right? Well, not really, right? I mean, Uber and Lyft and so on, that's a different story. But can transportation really get disrupted that quickly? I went back to the horses and the cars to see how quickly that adoption happened in the whole United States. Interestingly, what I found was that it went from 0 to about 95% in 20 years, nationally. But that's not that interesting. What was interesting is that from the tipping point to about 80%, which is when markets slow down, happened in 10 years. In 10 years. Now, this is more than 100 years ago, right? Even more interesting, this happened while we built 2 brand new industries, the auto industry and the oil industry. I mean, we're building it as we went. while we built a brand new road infrastructure nationally, and while we fought World War I. While all of that happened, the disruption took place in about 10 years. So anyone who tells you a disruption cannot happen in 10 years is not looking at the evidence. Even policies get adopted as S-curves. So this is the gasoline tax in America, which of course by now we know, basically as a constant, right? We all know it. We all pay it. Well, I don't. I don't own a car. But Oregon passed the first gas law in February 1919, and then within 6 years, 91% of US states had adopted that as an S-curve, right? Adoption happens as an S-curve. And technologies, if you think that technology is changing even more quickly than ever, it's because it is. Look at the S-curves going from 1900 to about 2000. They're getting steeper and steeper and steeper. Either you're in or you're out in a matter of weeks, months, or a couple of years, right? Either you're in or you're out. Now let me take a detour and go back to mainstream analysis. Now, this is the EIA projection of solar PV starting in the year 2000. The black line is reality, and all those colored lines, they're projections. So every year, starting in the year 2000, they make a prediction. In the year 2030, this is what we think solar PV is going to be. Every year, solar grows by about 40, 50%, and then the EIA goes back and says, oh, okay, so I'm going to move up my line. This is what I think is going to be in 2030. And they keep moving up the line, right? They haven't got a single projection, even in the ballpark, of reality, right? All their projections are linear, like that. See a line? In some cases, they even show that adoption is going to go down. Down. Now that solar PV is the cheapest form of energy generation, bar none, they still think it's going to go down. How is that possible, right? In any case, the projections are linear. They are mechanistic in the sense that they take one variable and they essentially extrapolate it. They don't take into account that society does not work and never has worked. Technology has never been adopted linearly, but as S-curves, right? Systems, if one thing changes, a lot of other things are going to change, and vice versa. That's the reality, right? So the conclusion is that mainstream analysis is about forecasting the past, not the future. They take what's today and they basically draw a line, right? And it's not just about PV or electric vehicles or whatever. In 2005, the EIA projected that the US was going to be a natural gas importer over the next few years, by 2020 or so. Importer. 10 years later, they projected that the US was going to be an exporter. Now, how hard is that to do now, right? After fracking and shale and so on. But in 2005, if you had to make an investment in the future of energy, and you looked at the EIA numbers, you said, look, we're going to have to import. And you built ports, you built infrastructure, and in fact, all that flipped, right? Between 2005, 8, and 13, they changed their forecasts by 500%, and then by another 90%, right? And if you follow that curve, essentially all they're doing is taking the recent past and extrapolating it. That's all they're doing. That's mainstream analysis for you. okay? So it's about extrapolating the past. Now, back to EVs. In 2010, the EIA predicted that there would be 118 electric vehicles sold in the year 2035. 118. Now, I always wonder, how do they come up with these numbers? I mean, I'm imagining them sitting in a room. Let's see, in 25 years, 50, nah, too small. Let's see, 100, I don't know, maybe. I mean, seriously, Tesla was already public. How hard was it to even predict 1,000, right? I mean, Tesla was selling like a couple of thousand even back then. Do you really think it's going to go down? Anyway, back to disruption. Convergence is very important. Why did the smartphone happen 2007? Now, I want you to ask that question. Why didn't the iPhone come out 2005 or 2009? Now, both the iPhone and the Android came out the same year, 2007. Not 5 or 9. What was the magic of 2007? 2007 is when all the technologies that made a smartphone possible converged. So all the computing power, broadband, data storage, touchscreen, all of these technologies that made a $600 smartphone possible happened 2007. So any of 30, 40 companies could have actually built a smartphone. Nokia could have done it. Motorola could have done it. Remember them? BlackBerry could have done it. Remember them? So why didn't they do it? That's another disruption. That's another lesson of disruption. Disruptions happen from the outside. Neither Google nor Apple had ever built a phone before. And yet, they're the ones who own 90+% of the smartphone market. Disruptions happen from the outside. It's very rare, the company that can disrupt itself. Business model innovation is every bit as disruptive as technology is, every bit. But business model innovations are enabled or made possible by the convergence that I'm talking about. So Uber, Lyft, ride-hailing, for instance, on-demand transportation, Uber started in 2009 in a little apartment in San Francisco. 7 years, so Uber and Lyft are business model innovations. They were made possible by the smartphone and the cloud. So it's no coincidence that Uber started 2009, 2 years after the smartphone came out. See, one thing makes the other possible. Now, in 7 years, Uber had more bookings than the whole taxi industry in America. Talk about a disruption. 7 years, from little apartment to more bookings than the whole taxi industry in America. So again, anyone who tells you a disruption cannot happen in transportation in 7 years is not looking at the evidence. And 8 years after Uber got started, Uber and Lyft became so big. They're like more than 20% of the vehicle miles traveled in cities like San Francisco and New York and so on. 20% from 0 to 20. So my question is, how do you go from 20 to 100? Is that possible at all? But again, that's a serious disruption. And starting a few years ago, a lot of folks stopped buying new cars because of ride-hailing. Stopped. This is not new. This started a few years ago. And I predicted by 2020, because of several reasons, this is one of them, there's going to be peak new car or peak new gasoline car. And what did mainstream analysts call me? Insane. Not going to happen. Number of cars is going to double. We're going to go from 1 billion to 2 billion and so on, and the planet's going to choke, and it's the end of the world as we know it. And I said, no, by 2020, we're going to have peak new gasoline car, right? Guess what's going on? Last year, I may have been off by a year, I don't know. But last year, China was down, the auto market, India was down, Europe was down, and the US was down. Was it a blip? I don't think so. The trend is clear, right? People are not buying new cars, essentially no gasoline cars and diesel cars, right? Now, I'll keep going on this because this is very disruptive. Now, another concept in my framework, the idea of market trauma. Now, what is market trauma? Essentially, because, what you hear from a lot of mainstream analysis is, don't worry about it, it's only 2%, 3% of the market. How much damage can it do? It's going to take 10, 20 years before, essentially this takes over the market and so on. Don't worry about it, right? Keep investing in whatever it is. The truth is different. The reality is that a technology can disrupt the economics of an incumbent way before they have 10, 20, 30% of the market, way before. So small changes from technology can have swift, dramatic impact in existing industries. And an example that I'm going to show you is the case of GE, which essentially GE Power has collapsed because they made the wrong choices. But solar and batteries are still a small percent of the market, right? So I'll get back to that. Now, what are the key technologies that I'm following that I think in combination, different convergence of different technologies are going to disrupt everything pretty much over the next 10, 15 years? These are basically the technologies that I'm following. This is not everything, but in energy, in transportation, in food, and so on, these technologies at different times and different places are essentially going to disrupt everything in the 2020s. Now, taking this, in 2014, I wrote a book called Clean Disruption of Energy and Transportation. And I'm going to walk you through the conclusions and also further work that I've done. The conclusion of that book, essentially 4 technologies: batteries, EVs, autonomous technology, on-demand transportation, meaning ride-hailing, and solar are going to disrupt all of energy and transportation, and it's over by 2030. We can go home now, right? And yeah, of course, you can imagine what I was called back then. So I'm going to walk you through this. The first one is, I'm not going to talk about solar. In 2014, so almost 6 years ago, this is a cost curve that I drew about lithium-ion batteries. And it was based on the recent cost curve of lithium-ion batteries, which have been around since the early 90s. I said, over the next 15 years, lithium-ion is going to go down at about 16% per year. Now, I don't need to be accurate. I just need to see a trend, right? That things are not going to be the way that most people think it is. And of course, at the time, I'm not going to repeat it. I was called insane. But guess what? It's 2020, and the cost of lithium-ion batteries is exactly what I predicted. Exactly, right? But in fact, why? Because in 2014, very few folks imagined how big this industry would be in only 5.5 years. There were only 3 lithium-ion megafactories. Now there are 96. 96. This is not a linear scale. This is totally super exponential, right? And of course, the cost curve has actually accelerated. So maybe they were right. 16% was not going to happen. It didn't. Now it's more than 20% every year, right? So it's actually happening even more quickly. Now, storage is enabling disruptions in electricity. So one example is in Australia, where a big Tesla battery that had 2% of the market, 2% of the capacity of that market in South Australia, essentially took 55% market share, money, and brought wholesale prices down by about 90%. Repeat, with 2% of capacity, they brought down the incumbent revenues by 90%. This is what I call market trauma. You don't need a battery to take 50% of the capacity market to disrupt the electricity providers, right? That's market trauma. And the cost of batteries, because it's going down so fast, and because it's being enabled both by energy and transportation, it is disrupting ancillary services, and then peakers, and now baseload, right? Just as I predicted, boom, boom, boom. A disruption from above, okay? And today, natural gas plants are being disrupted. They're being shut down because of big batteries. Today, this is not in the future. Natural gas, as peakers, are already stranded. All of them, right? You just need to put a battery and then it's over, right? And this market is growing by leaps and bounds today, right? So what happened to GE? This is what happened to GE. They expected the natural gas market to keep growing over the future, the next 20 years, and the nuclear market, and the coal market. And they bet on that, and they doubled down on that, and their stock went down 74% or so. They almost got wiped out. This is one of the premier industrial companies in America, in the world of the 20th century, right? Making a linear projection that things were going to happen in the future just like they did in the past. It didn't happen. They expected, they knew about solar. I mean, they have a wind company. They know what's going on, but they would have expected those markets not to affect their revenues for another 10, 20 years. Wrong, because of market trauma. Okay, so batteries enable the electric vehicle, right? So here's a question. Is the electric vehicle disruptive? Or is it a, commie conspiracy, greenie conspiracy against the oil companies, right? And another question, who can afford an EV, right? Did I say I don't own a car? I can't afford. See, I have the same suit 10 years later. That's 10 years ago. Same suit, same tie. So EVs are 10 times cheaper on a per mile basis to charge. 10 times cheaper. And that may be improving, actually. In Georgia, the University of Georgia, they're buying, I think, 20 electric buses. They did a test, and in terms of gasoline, they spend actually 90 for buses and 10 a day for electric buses. So that's 9x. 9 times cheaper to fuel than electric than gasoline or diesel. Now, maintenance. If you own a gasoline or hybrid, actually, car, this is your car. I mean, it has more than 2,000 moving parts. That's your car, right? Whereas an EV has about 20 moving parts, that's it. These things don't break. Maintenance is essentially free for these things. Only 20 moving parts, and they're magnetic, right? They're magnetic, they barely move. That's why companies can offer infinite mile warranty, because these things don't break, right? Now, modular design architecture. I want you to see this, especially if you own a truck. Tell me if you can do this. Good luck doing that with your F-150. Yeah? Now, there's nothing magic about this. Electric powertrains, you can have any number of motors. Now, this truck has four motors, but you can have 8 or 2 or 3. You can't do that with a conventional engine. So basically, it gives you or the computer a lot more control over traction. You can actually park sideways with an EV. I mean, try that with your diesel, right? Now, here's the most important thing about electric vehicles. They last 500,000 miles, right? A gasoline car lasts, 140, maybe 200 if it's a Volvo. 140 more or less. We drive them 12 years, 10,000, 12,000 miles a year. But an EV lasts 500,000 miles. And actually Tesla just announced a 1,000,000-mile EV coming soon, right? But let's keep it at 500,000. Now, here's the thing. We drive 10,000 miles every year. If an EV lasts 500,000 miles, we would need 50 years to drive one. Who drives a car for 50 years, right? Unless you live in Cuba. But, so for individuals, it may not be that interesting, but if you're a fleet, if you're Uber, if you're FedEx, if you're Lyft, then you drive your car or van 100,000 miles a year. So over 5 years, you either want one EV or 3 internal combustion engine cars or vans. Does that make sense? So for fleets, it makes total sense for them to go full EV, even without autonomous technology, because for purely economic reasons. So when the cost of EVs approach the cost of ICE vehicles, then you're going to see the market flip for fleets, right? So this is the same curve that I drew again for electric vehicles in 2014, so almost 6 years ago. And I said, by now, by the year 2020, you will see the market offer a 200-mile electric vehicle. And by the way, 200 miles for me has been the minimum. I don't consider hybrids, I don't consider anything below that. I only consider 200-mile plus EVs, right? I said that by now, 2020, you're gonna see $30,000 EVs, no subsidies, $30,000 EVs. Now, back then, an EV was $80,000, $100,000. And of course, you're insane and all that stuff. Guess what? I've been right on the money. I mean, last year, Tesla, $35,000. This year, we've seen several, actually, cars in China break the $30,000 barrier. Already, it's been right on the money. Almost to the month, right? Almost to the month. Now, here's what's interesting about $30,000. The average, the median new car in America costs $34,000. Now, the market is offering EVs, which I showed you are far better, right? They last longer. They fuel up, at a tenth of the cost, no maintenance and so on, for less money than the median new car in America, right? The shift is going to happen for purely economic reasons starting next year, okay? Next year is the tipping point for purely economic reasons. It won't make any sense to buy gasoline cars, and the cost is going to continue to go down. By 2025, you'll be able to buy a $12,000 electric vehicle with 200 miles. $12,000, right? If I continue to be right, which I am, right? I mean, sorry, I mean, I am right. I mean, we can see this in China. Anyone who has any doubt, please go there. We're already seeing $10,000 cars with, 120, 130 miles today. How hard is it to believe that the same car is not going to have 200 miles? Not, right? 2025. So if this is right, then every new car after 2025 is going to be electric. Every new car for purely economic reasons. because they're more powerful, they're cheaper to maintain, and so on and so forth. 2025, not 40, not 50, for purely economic reasons, because it makes sense, right? Now, Amazon just ordered 100,000 vans to hit the road starting 2021 to 2020. 100,000. Now, Amazon is not known for being green, right? They're known for making green. They're making the right economic choice for Amazon. And they're already essentially going electric because they have to, because it's cutting the cost of deliveries for Amazon. Okay? Now, if Amazon is doing this, what do you think their competitors have to do? What do you think FedEx has to do? And UPS? They have to, otherwise they cannot compete. They all have to go electric, right? And by the way, I didn't say that a 200-mile EV can provide power for the average home in America for 2 days. 2 full days of power. You can power your house with your electric vehicle. Try that with your F-150, right? Again, you can't do that. You can actually make money with your electric vehicle, right? Or save money. Okay, so that's the EV. And that's disruptive in its own way. And ride-hailing is disruptive in its own way. In autonomous technology, let's talk about autonomous technology. Just watch this a little bit. This is Google, now Waymo, and they've had this program in Arizona, in Chandler. Now they have about 1,500 active monthly users of this autonomous ride-hailing program. They go to work, go to school, go to shop. Just look at it. No hands, Mom. Okay, there are more than 4 dozen companies. Actually, one new one pops up every day. Yesterday, Sony announced that they have an autonomous vehicle. Sony, who knew? All of these companies are investing tens of billions of dollars in autonomous technology. I mean, there's a race to be the first in autonomy. Why is that, right? I mean, can't you just wait for somebody else to do it? Because mainstream analysts say that not gonna happen until 2040, right? Why are they in such a rush? Well, I'll tell you what. Autonomous technology is like an operating system. So think of EVs or autonomous vehicles as computers on wheels. That's what they are. They're computers with one big battery and wheels, right? Autonomous technology is the operating system. Now, if you think of computing history, Android, iOS, 2 survived. Mac, Windows, 2 survived, right? I mean, you have a third one maybe, Linux or whatever, but because of network effects, only 2 operating systems usually take more than 90% of the market. And that's exactly what is going to happen with autonomous technology. It's an operating system. And only 2 things we can learn from the history of computing. The first one is no one is going to wait. Apple did not wait for anyone before they came out with the iPhone. Once iOS worked, they came to market. And 2, only 2 companies are going to survive, right? Maybe 3, but that's it. And everybody's going to have to pay money to these 2 companies if they want to play. That's why everybody's investing so much. Now, Waymo ordered 62,000 self-driving minivans that are going to be delivered this year, 2020. 62,000 fleet vehicles are about 5% of all the vehicle miles traveled in North Carolina. That's it, 62,000. They're super disruptive. right? And expect them to go to market. I expect them to go to market this or next year. 62,000, and that's not all, right? But here's the question. Are autonomous vehicles safe, right? Because all I hear, all I read is death, 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 fatalities, right? So let me give you a number from Tesla. According to Tesla, Teslas with autopilot, based on actual mileage, are 8.8 times safer today than human drivers. Today, that's not even level 4 autonomy, okay? Teslas with autopilots are 8+ times safer than humans. And we're not getting any better, we meaning humans, right? And Tesla's technology is, it's computer technology. Both the hardware and the software are getting better. Now, interestingly, I predicted in Rethinking Transportation that by 2020, that autonomous technology would be 5 times safer than humans. How am I doing? And by 2022, it would be 10 times safer. How am I doing? They're going to be a lot more. This is the latest quarter data. By the end of this year, Tesla's technology may well be already 10 times safer than humans. By 2030, let me make another prediction. We're going to be talking about taking driver licenses away from humans because we're so dangerous. If this keeps improving at 40% per year, that's 2x every 2 years, we're looking at autonomous technology being 100 times safer than humans within 5-6 years. That's it, not 2030. Insurance costs are going to go up for human drivers, right? Because we're going to be considered dangerous. If the whole world used the technology of Tesla Autopilot, according to the company, we would save 900,000 lives. We kill 1.2 million people every year in car accidents. Using that technology, we could save today 900,000 people. Now, who is not safe here? Humans or autonomous technology? If we apply that to North Carolina, we could save 1,000 lives every year, starting now, if we use this autonomous technology. 1,000 people every year. So the question is not whether autonomous technology is safe. The question is, why are we not implementing it? Why are we not saving 1,000 lives every year, right? Now, how quickly is this improving? The cost curve of supercomputing, which is what AVs use, essentially, let me give you an idea. The largest supercomputer on Earth cost $50 million. It was, the size of this room, and 150, 1,600 square feet, and so on and so forth. That was 1 teraflops, whatever that is, right? 1 teraflops, $50 million. By 2016, 8 teraflops were $600. Repeat, 1 teraflop, $50 million, to 8 teraflops, $600 in 16 years. That's an improvement of 600,000 times. Now, it gets better, right? The Apple 10 has 5 trillion operations per second, free with your iPhone, right? That power would have cost $250 million in the year 2000, right? Which is why companies are investing in not 5 or 10, in hundreds of trillion operations per second. And that's what Tesla's doing and NVIDIA's doing and so on. And according to NVIDIA, 25 companies are developing level 5, which is the very, very, very best autonomous technology using their stuff. So it's improving not just exponentially, Now, if all you remember is one thing, is the improvement of AI may well be not just exponential, but double exponential. Not just exponential, but insanely super exponential, right? So if you remember Google DeepMind beating the world champ at the game of Go, now Go is not chess. You can't beat somebody at Go with raw computing power. You actually need intelligence or something like it. Now, it took DeepMind about 3 years to beat the European Go champion. 3 years, right? And that was huge because the experts thought it would take another 10 for computers to beat humans. 5 months later, the computer beat the world champion. Now, the world champion is probably 10 times better than the European champion, and that took 3 months. And then they took that software, they chucked it, and they developed a brand new one from scratch. And that brand new technology beat the technology that beat the world champion in less than 3 days. 3 years, 5 months, 3 days. That is double exponential, right? That's insane. Anyone who thinks that autonomous technology is not going to improve at exponential rates is not looking at this evidence, right? And autonomous technology is not just for cars. Remember, this is a computer on wheels, right? And if you can run an operating system on a small computer, you can run it on a bigger computer, and so on and so forth. Anything that moves on wheels is going to be autonomous. Even bicycles, even anything, tricycles, trucks, you name it. And this means that delivery vehicles, FedEx just announced their delivery vehicle. Little one, bigger one. Everything that moves on wheels is going to be autonomous. And the market impact. Now, if anyone is worried about the last mile, now on highways, they're very easy. Check this out, right? Anyone who likes gaming, you can actually drive a car from across the country. So that's last mile delivery, and that answers the question of what happens if a car breaks down, right? Essentially, you can drive it from halfway across the country. Now, this is all good, right? Autonomous is disruptive, EVs are disruptive, on-demand transportation is disruptive. So where's the big disruption, right? The disruption is actually in the convergence of these three technologies. The convergence. That's how the big disruptions happen. Now, before I take you into that and the consequences, just a reminder that cars are the second largest expenditures of the middle class in America after our homes. But we only use them 4% of the time. We park them 96% of the time. I mean, anyone knows 4% asset utilization is a disruption waiting to happen. And in fact, it will happen because of this convergence. Because a fleet, car or van or truck, can drive 10 times more efficiently. Instead of 4%, 40%, or 50 or 60, right? So if they drive 100,000 miles per year, and because of lower maintenance costs and whatnot, the cost per mile of electric, autonomous, on-demand transportation is a lot lower. How much lower? I'll show you. Oh, everyone is going electric. Did I say that? DD, which is the Uber in China, or actually Uber is the DD of America. They expect to have 1 million electric vehicles this year. 1 million this year. Now, just to give you an idea, 1 million fleet EVs can drive the equivalent of 80% of all the vehicle miles in North Carolina. Just 1 million. You just need about 1.2 or 3 million fleet EVs, and you can cover all the transportation needs in North Carolina. So transport as a service is what I call this disruption. On demand, autonomous and electric, owned by fleets, not individuals, fleets. That's transport as a service. The day that autonomous technology is approved, now let's assume 2021, let's assume this happens next year. That day, the cost per mile of TaaS is going to be up to 10 times cheaper than the cost of owning a car. So next year, essentially, if autonomous technology is ready and approved, this is the decision that a potential buyer is going to have to make. Do I want to spend 50 grand over the next 5 years to buy a new car, or do I want a $100 subscription to Uber or Lyft or whatever per month, just like Netflix, $100, no brainer. 10x cost differential has always caused a disruption in history. Every single time, a 10x cost differential has always enabled a disruption. So let's assume 2021, the cost per mile drops by about 10 times. And in fact, the cost of transport as a service, which is going to be about 10 cents, is going to be below the operating costs of your car. It's going to be below, I mean, even if your uncle gives you a free car, the costs of fuel and insurance and parking and all that are going to be higher by 2 to 4 times than the cost of transport as a service. So you may not sell your car right away, but you will eventually, because the cost of TaaS are going to keep going down, right? And many companies have agreed with these numbers 3 years later, including Tesla, which is saying now that their transport as a service is going to cost about 18 cents, which is in the ballpark. Now, if this happens, essentially, by 2030, 95% of all vehicle mile travel in America would be on-demand, autonomous, and electric. Essentially, folks are going to stop buying new cars, and if they do, because of whatever reason, they live too far away, or they have too much money, or whatever, essentially by 2030, 60% of cars are going to be fleet, and 40% are going to be individually owned. But the fleet cars are going to contribute 100,000 miles a year. So it's going to be 95% of all miles, which means that essentially the whole system of gasoline vehicles, trucks, vans, cars, and so on is going to come to an end over the next 10 years. The implications of that are going to be astonishing. So I'm going to walk you through some of that. Folks are going to stop buying new cars because they don't make any economic sense. Because they can save, on average, $5,600 every year by going with transport as a service. $5,600 per person by not owning a car, right? So new vehicle sales shrink. The total vehicle fleet, meaning every single car in America, is going to drop by about 70%. Because eventually we're going to sell our cars and we're going to have fewer cars doing 100,000 miles rather than a lot of cars doing 10,000 miles per year. Implications, an income boost per family of $5,600. In our pockets, this is not for the government, this is in our pockets by not owning a car and using TaaS, right? US disposable income increases by $1 trillion. Trillion with a T. Now, because also, so that goes into our pockets, $1 trillion. This is bigger than any boost to the economy ever, $1 trillion in our pockets. Productivity increased by not driving. Instead of spending all that time on the road driving, if we can do anything else. Now, we're not all necessarily going to work. Some of us are going to sleep, some of us are going to play. But by not driving and doing other stuff, we're going to free up, we're going to increase productivity, by about another $1 trillion on a national level. What does that mean for North Carolina? More or less, personal income boost of $45 billion per year, which is equivalent to an increase in wage of 10 to 18%. 10 to 18%. That's not bad, right? Every year. I mean, this is money in your pocket every year. Productivity increase by not driving is $45 billion in our pockets, right? That's $90 billion for the North Carolina economy. Social, because it's going to be so cheap, 10 cents, 5 cents per mile. I mean, you'll be able to go from Durham to Raleigh for less than $1, right? Door to door, less than $1, on demand, okay? Everybody's going to benefit, everybody, elderly, pensioners, retired folks, young, middle class, it doesn't matter, right? Essentially, transportation is going to be almost free compared to what it is today. And increased transportation benefits everybody, everybody. I mean, there's all kinds of evidence that a lot of jobs are not where people are. A lot of people can't access those jobs because of transportation, right? So essentially more people can access those jobs and vice versa. Economic gains, wealth gains, social gains, and that accrues to everybody in society. Now, vehicles are going to be redesigned. It's not, this is not your father's Oldsmobile, right? I mean, it's going to be more like this. It's going to be like a living room. This is going to be a commute, okay? Totally redesigned. It's not the same vehicles. And by the way, we're going to get money back, and on top of that, we're going to get a 90% decrease in CO2 emissions. How cool is that? It's not going to cost us money. We're going to get money back and decrease CO2 emissions by 90%, right? Traffic accidents, like I said, 1 million lives saved, 1,000 plus in North Carolina. And this is the road to free transportation. I mean, imagine a Starbucks on wheels, right? I mean, I live about 40 miles away from Palo Alto. 40 miles, I pay about 60 for an Uber. Now, I don't commute every day, right? A tenth of that would be $6, right? So with transport as a service, it would cost me $6 to go 40 miles, just about, maybe $4. But if you're Starbucks and you can round up 10 people in my neighborhood and take them to Palo Alto, essentially it costs Starbucks 60 cents per person. They can offer me free transportation, hop on the bus, right? Buy the latte. 60 cents is cheaper than them paying the rent in a downtown shop. Does that make sense? And I get free transportation. And it's not just Starbucks. It's offices on wheels. It's physical therapy on wheels. This is going to change everything about work, about retail, and of course, transportation. Oil industry, implications are massive, of course. If autonomous technology is approved next year, as I expect, right, we're going to peak this year. Oil demand is going to peak this year. Okay? Now, it may take a year or two more, but it's not going to be 10 years, right? So assume it peaks this year. That means that oil consumption is going to go down from 100 million barrels per year to about 70 by 2030. Okay? So it's going to be a smooth curve down, not up. Okay? Now, what happens because of the economics of oil is that at 70 million barrels, I mean, we know from 2014-15 that if you have an oversupply of about 2 or 3 million barrels per day, the price of oil collapses to about 20, 25. It's already happened. Now, in this scenario, that will happen next year, right? So the price of oil is going to crash to about $25 next year or the year after. $25, right? Which means that a lot of the investments in oil now are going to be on commercial starting the next couple of years. Anything that cannot compete at 25 is gone, stranded forever, because it's not coming back, right? The implications for land use also. Our cities are about a third parking. A third parking because we park our cars 96% of the time. But what if we don't own cars? What if they're fleet cars going round and round and round, right? We don't need parking. 80+% of parking is going to be obsolete. It's going to be the first time that we're going to have an opportunity to redesign our cities, to envision the cities that we want rather than the cities that we have, right? More green parks, check. More businesses, check. More, residential buildings, check. A third of the landmass of every city is going to open up, more or less. Now, I did the numbers for downtown Durham. Not all of Durham, but downtown. And downtown Durham can open up 2.6 million square feet that are given to parking now. What can you put in 2.6 million square feet? Apple computers. Their headquarters, Apple Park, is about 2.8 million square feet. Just saying, right? That we can attract big employers and people and so on and so forth in all that space. I did the numbers for San Francisco. In the obsolete free parking space in Los Angeles, you can put 3 cities the size of San Francisco, 3 whole cities. So essentially today, whether it's San Francisco or Charlotte or Durham or Raleigh, we need to envision what do we want to do with this space? Or somebody else is going to do it for us, right? Now let me tell you something about parking. Other people have heard this message. The largest parking operator in the US is a cloud kitchen company. Wow, what is a cloud kitchen company, right? There's a new model of food. And food is being disrupted. I can talk about that some other time, but essentially you have places for food preparation only, for delivery only. So a cloud kitchen company is buying up parking in the downtowns to put up these cloud kitchen. They prepare food and just, deliver them. No seats, nothing, right? That's happening today, okay? So this disruption is happening. And I'll leave you with this thought. The disruption is not just about transportation. Everything is changing. Now you're going to have, anyone who went to the drone event yesterday, awesome. Drones can already transport people today, right? And drones are going to be combined with autonomous vans to deliver packages. So 2 technologies converging, and we have the technology. When it's going to happen is more of a regulatory thing than it is a technology thing, right? And real estate also. Solar, batteries, electric vehicles, artificial intelligence are turning buildings into essentially autonomous buildings. They can create their own energy, they can store it, they can sell it, and so on and so forth. The disruption of transportation is changing everything: work, real estate, food, parking, everything. Now is the time for us to imagine what city, what state we want to be within 10 years, because we can. Because when these disruptions happen, it's going to be too late. Everybody's going to be in execution mode. So I'll leave you with this thought. I started with New York City in 1900. We are here. We are where New York City was in 1900. This is 2020, and we're on the cusp of the deepest, fastest, most consequential disruption of transportation and energy and food and cities in 100 years, if not ever. This is the time to envision what we want our cities to be when we grow up. And it's going to happen quickly. And I'll leave you with one thought. This is not happening. This is not an energy transition. This is not happening because of climate. This is not happening because of governments. This is happening for purely economic reasons. This is a technology disruption. It's going to give us money back. It's not going to cost money. We're going to get money back. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm sit down. I think we're going to put up the survey question and see what the audience's opinion was. If it's up, oh, let me step out so I can see it. So what technology has the potential to be the most disruptive in the next 50 years? Strong support, over 50% for autonomous vehicles, solar energy at 11%, electric vehicles at 18%, and drones at I think 19%, if I'm saying that correct. So you're seeing those as individuals, but Tony pointed out that it's the convergence of some of those that's going to make a big difference. Just a few questions, and I'm going to leave with one, because I know folks out here have heard lots of predictions about autonomous, connected, electric, and shared vehicle services. It will result in increasing VMT, not changing VMT, substantially decreasing VMT where we need less capacity. What does your analysis show?
Yeah, so the analysis shows the cost of transport is going to go down substantially, demand's going to go up. So I see a 50% increase by 2030. And that's because folks don't have access.
A 50% increase over a 2030 projection.
Over what we drive now, over the projection, yes. So folks who don't have access to good transportation, the elderly, the disabled, the kids, and so on, are going to have access to transportation. So there's going to be a big bump, 50% at least, yeah.
And so then my last follow-up to that would be, in this, and we see the trends nationally, we see them in North Carolina where we're working hard to better connect our rural, suburban, and urban centers. What do rural communities need to be doing to prepare, and how do they leverage this potential?
Yeah, so, so rural, the cost of transport as a service in rural communities is going to be higher because they don't have the critical mass. I think what we need to do as a society, in the past, what we did was we decided that we would provide electricity to rural communities, even though it didn't make that much sense in terms of cost. But for equity reasons, we decided we would need to do it. Water, postal service. So essentially, we decided that all Americans need to have access to electricity and water and communication and so on. I think that's what we need to do in the case of rural communities. I think that the role of public transportation has to change, will change, from one of managing assets, buses and so on, to one of managing transport as a service to provide equity for all. Transportation is not a want, transportation is a need. So we need to do that. That's how it's all going to change. And we need to start doing that now. And there are many ways to start doing that. School buses, I mean, any kind of ways in which we don't need to touch individually owned transportation, right? So that this is an experience good. An experience good means that it's a good that you need to experience it before you know how good it is. So we need to show them, right? We need to do pilots and testing and so on and so forth. I'll give you one example. Singapore, which really wants self-driving to happen, Saturdays in this one park, they give free rides in autonomous technology, right? Just for half a block, so that people can experience it. And they go like, oh, this is it, no big deal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any questions from the audience?
Got one down front here.
Yes.
We got a microphone coming.
This was terrific. I just thought I'd ask, I'm Mike Solomon. I'm an engineer working on a number of mega sites in North Carolina for transportation. The one that we lost, the big Toyota Mazda plant, I've been working on for 8 years. Yeah. So I've been luckily, I have an opportunity to talk to the Tesla folks over the last 6 months and about sites here in North Carolina. And here's something that is a real challenge for our transportation team. one of the executives that I've been meeting with and talking to is saying one of the challenges for the whole United States for electric vehicles is charging stations.
Right.
And I just wondered if, as an industry, if you have any thoughts about how the world is going to be able to prepare for the change to electric cars throughout the whole country.
Right. So let me take you back to 1900. Does anyone know when the first gas station in the country was built? In the whole country? 1905. Okay, 1905. Before that, gas used to be delivered by horses, right? So my point is that, you know, the chicken and egg thing is not because of the lack of charging stations, it's because of the lack of affordable 200-mile electric vehicles. And when we have that in abundance in the market, then the market is going to build the charging stations. I don't see a reason why the government should do it. I mean, the government didn't build the gas stations, right? Tesla is building its own charging station nationally and worldwide, right? So once you see that, the market is going to take care of it. You know, I was an early employee in a then little company called Cisco Systems, 93, 94. A lot of folks, you know, looked at us thinking, you're never going to disrupt the landline telephony market, right? Famous last words. And, you know, we built the internet. We built it as we went. And we've done that with any number of infrastructure, highways and communication and so on and so forth. So I don't see how this time is going to be any different.
Please join me in thanking Tony for the wonderful and thought-provoking presentation.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Mike.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony and Jim. My job is to keep us on time here and also make sure you know where you need to go next. I got to tell you how excited I am about this conference, because as great as that just was, and that was great, you know, all of our sessions are like that. So I really am excited about the rest of the day. Our next session, we'll take a small break, about 15 minutes, come back at 10:45, and we'll be in this room for our next general session. I do want to note for the breakout sessions, you can obviously attend any one that you're interested in. There's been one change. Tomorrow, the NCGO Metro Mayor's session will be at 11, and the Urban Rural will be at 1:30. That's in the app, so it's updated. So if you've got the app downloaded, you'll have that at your fingertips. Snacks are outside the ballroom. All the meals are in the exhibitors hall. I really encourage you to actually go around, look at the exhibits, talk to the exhibitors. Those are the folks that make it possible for us to be here on the one hand. On the other hand, they've got some fascinating stuff down there. The autonomous drone taxi is down there. We got an opportunity to see that fly for the very first time in North America here. North Carolina is again first in flight, so I would encourage you all to go down and see that. It's fascinating technology. And the exhibitors will be happy to talk to you about anything they have there. So with that, please come back here for our next session at 10:45, and thank you very much for your attendance.